Here are 7 mistakes to avoid when making a custom raised bed to enjoy having it for many years. Recently, I've made this beautiful raised bed with a surprising twist. A foldable table that will allow you to see your beautiful garden while having breakfast or a morning coffee with your family. There's a video on my channel of how to make it from scratch. You can go ahead and get inspired. Anyway, here are some things that are worth avoiding so that your creation is pain-free and you can enjoy it for much longer. Having a tall raised bed with a shallower bottom. These beds need a huge amount of soil, which is actually really heavy, putting unnecessary load on your whole structure, meaning that you have to make it stronger, more resilient than necessary. You can avoid that by making your bottom shallower, in this case 30 centimeters deep or about 12 inches deep. This was more than sufficient to grow vegetables and whatever was necessary, while limiting the amount of soil used. It's something that we realized after building the whole thing and calculating how many tons of soil the structure needs. That's right, tons! Because it was 90 centimeters tall, it needed around 1,500 liters of soil, which is roughly just over 2 tons of soil, a huge weight which would put a lot of pressure on the whole structure. And by limiting the depth, we have reduced the weight of the soil to around 650 kilograms, which is a substantial difference. It means a lot less work for you, easier draining, separation from ground, and various other benefits. Another thing to avoid is not reinforcing the structure in the middle. Even with a shallower bottom, there is still a lot of weight on the structure. In my case, because the whole thing is quite long and thin, the soil will be pushing out the wood outwards due to its weight. And over the many years that this raised bed will be used, especially with rain, harsh winters and general use, the chances of that happening are actually quite high. I would suggest to reinforce the structure right in the middle. This of course depends on what specific structure your raised bed has. Another mistake to avoid is not creating a foundation for your raised bed. Now this one is very much dependent on whether you're hoping to move it in the future or not. But raised beds are heavy structures and will need a proper support to stay level. It can be a proper concrete foundation or perhaps just a row of bricks or stones, or any other way to create a stable foundation to lie your beautiful structure on top of. This of course is heavily dependent on what type of climate you live in and what type of soil you have. In my case, I have a fairly soft soil and experience a lot of rain and harsh winters. As such, having a proper foundation is critical and prolongs the life of our creation by quite a lot. Another thing to avoid is not protecting your wood from the ground and moisture. Wood is a great material, but it wears out over time, especially when it has a lot of contact with ground and moisture. In order to avoid rot and your structure failing over time, it's critical to properly protect your wood, starting from picking the most appropriate wood for your specific location. In my case, due to harsh winters and heavy rains, pine actually works really well, and it has the ability to withstand all of that for many years, while being actually very cheap to buy. Of course, you also want to additionally help it by ensuring you properly prime the wood and stain it to protect it from the bacteria, diseases, heavy rain and general weather. Also making sure to stain it every few years to keep all of that beautiful wood in a good shape. But that's not all. Even with all of this protection, if the wood is in a direct contact with moist ground or simply just sits in water, it's going to give in much faster. To avoid that, I would suggest to add some separation between the ground and wood. In my case, I've used the polyethylene thick tape to ensure that there is at least a small distance between my foundation and the wood itself. One additional risky area is right in the middle of the raised box. Depending on the amount of rain in your area, you could be risking that soil being damp over long periods of time and damaging the woods in the process. One thing you can do is to create a barrier between the wood and the soil by using a polyethylene foam sheet and landscape fabric. It can of course be a different waterproof sheet, but polyethylene is what I've used in this case. Another mistake to avoid is adding screws close to the edges without pre-drilling them. This is more of a general woodworking advice, but I would heavily suggest to pre-drill any holes whenever you're inserting screws nearby the edges of the boards. It might be obvious, but areas closer to the edge are at much higher risk of splitting, and due to your raised box experiencing various harsh conditions over the years, there will be a lot of strain on those edges. One last thing to avoid is not making the raised bed visually pleasing. More often than not, raised bed is an area that you will be seeing a lot of over the years, and it could be a nice addition to your garden or just a giant eyesore. In my view at least, it should be a nice addition. As such, putting extra care in the woodwork that you create or adding a nice stain is going to go a long way. Adding some lights or some decoration is going to make the mundane into something special, and after all of that hard work you put into making those, it would be nice for it to be nice. So that's the biggest mistakes to avoid when it comes to the woodwork and the structure itself. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have or not, please let me know in the comments below. And subscribe to see more projects like that.